The 1960s, a decade pulsating with change. Out of this turbulent era, a new generation emerged, the hippies. They challenged the status quo. They embraced peace, love, and personal liberation. Their music, their art, their very existence shook traditional society. From the Beats to the psychedelic explorers, a counterculture was born. They yearned for a society free from war, inequality, and environmental destruction. But by the mid-1970s, the vibrant tapestry of the hippie movement began to fade. To understand this decline, we must delve into the forces that fractured this era of cultural awakening. The 1970s witnessed a global economic earthquake. The term stagflation entered the lexicon, a sinister combination of economic stagnation and runaway inflation. The economy sputtered, unemployment soared, and prices skyrocketed. For the idealistic hippies, who had largely rejected materialistic pursuits, the economic downturn presented a unique challenge. Communal living arrangements, often sustained by meager earnings, became increasingly difficult to maintain. The oil crisis of 1973, triggered by an embargo imposed by Arab members of OPEC, added fuel to the fire. Gas prices surged, further straining an already struggling economy. The hippie movement, with its emphasis on environmentalism and sustainable living, grappled with the realities of a resource-constrained world. The economic turmoil of the 1970s chipped away at the foundations of the hippie dream. The promise of a carefree, alternative lifestyle seemed increasingly out of reach. The hippie movement, with its anti-establishment stance, had always faced resistance. The late 1960s and early 1970s saw increased socio-political pressures aimed at curtailing the movement's influence. The Vietnam War, a focal point of hippie protests, ended in 1975. While this was a victory for the anti-war movement, it also removed a powerful unifying force for the hippies. The draft was abolished and media attention shifted elsewhere. Meanwhile, the war on drugs launched by the Nixon administration intensified. Drug use, particularly of psychedelics, had become associated with the counterculture. The government's crackdown on drugs created a climate of fear and paranoia. Hippie communities, often seen as havens for drug experimentation, became targets of police raids and surveillance. The political landscape shifted to the right, further alienating many hippies. Internal conflicts and contradictions within the movement played a significant role in its fragmentation. The very ideals that had once united hippies became points of contention as the movement grew. The concept of a unified hippie identity was always somewhat illusory. The movement encompassed a wide range of beliefs and lifestyles. As the movement matured, these differences became more pronounced, leading to internal divisions. The commercialization of hippie culture further diluted its authenticity. What had begun as a rejection of materialism and consumerism became increasingly commodified. Tie-dye shirts, peace signs, and other symbols of the counterculture were mass-produced and sold for profit. This commercialization created a sense of disillusionment among many hippies. The idealism that had fueled the movement began to wane, replaced by a growing sense of cynicism. As the hippie movement waned, a new counterculture emerged: punk rock. Born in the mid-1970s, punk was a raw, visceral reaction against the excesses and hypocrisy of both mainstream culture and the fading hippie movement. Punk rejected the peace and love message of the hippies, replacing it with a more aggressive ethos. Punk music was loud, fast, and angry, a sonic assault on the status quo. The lyrics were often cynical and nihilistic, reflecting a deep disillusionment with society. Visually, punk was a shock to the system, with its spiky hair, ripped clothing, and safety pin piercings. While punk shared some similarities with the hippie movement, its methods and message were fundamentally different. Punk was a rebellion against the perceived failures of the hippie dream. The media quickly embraced punk, leaving the hippies behind. By the late 1970s, the hippie movement as a distinct cultural force had largely dissipated. The economic turmoil, social backlash, internal conflicts, and the rise of new countercultures all contributed to its decline. However, it would be a mistake to view the hippie movement as a failure. While it may not have achieved all of its utopian goals, its impact on society was profound and enduring. The hippies challenged traditional social norms and values, paving the way for greater social and cultural freedom. Their embrace of diversity, their questioning of authority, and their advocacy for peace and environmentalism left an indelible mark on American society. Many of the ideals championed by the hippies, such as environmentalism, organic food, and personal growth, have become mainstream. The hippies also left behind a rich cultural legacy. Their music, art, and literature continue to inspire and influence artists today. The fight for social justice, environmental protection, and peace continues, carried forward by new generations. The decline of the hippie movement was not a singular event, but rather a gradual unraveling. The economic hardships of the 1970s, coupled with government crackdowns and a changing social climate, eroded the movement's foundations. Internal conflicts and the commodification of hippie culture further diluted its message. Yet, the hippies' impact on society was undeniable. They challenged the status quo, expanded cultural boundaries, and sowed the seeds for future social and environmental movements. Their legacy lives on in the ongoing pursuit of peace, equality, and a sustainable future. The story of the hippie movement is a reminder that social change is a complex and evolving process. Movements rise and fall, influenced by internal and external forces. Yet the ideals that drive these movements endure, resurfacing in new forms and inspiring future generations.